I get it. I have a lot that I'm constantly doing, and I decided 2 weeks ago to do this, what I lovingly refer to as the Great Christmas Decoration Exchange. So I have people bringing in Christmas decorations that I can then put out in our parking lot on Saturday and distribute to families who don't have any Christmas decorations.
What a great idea.
Because I say every year I see people wanting to get rid of Christmas decorations. Every year I see people needing that. So 2 weeks ago, I had thought about it for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks ago, I'm just like, I'm going to do it.
Wow. Wow. That's a terrific idea. That's a great idea.
Oh, it was in the Wichita Eagle today. And so people have just been streaming and into our building, dropping off stuff. And I'm just like, because I didn't have enough to do, but.
You're not on mute, right? You type here and not.
Jackie, welcome back.
Hello.
We'll give people about 2 more minutes to jump on. All right, well, it's 11:34, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Cindy Miles and I'm the president and CEO of the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber. I've been doing board development training and certified through the Board Source. If you're familiar with Board Source, I went through their training a few years ago and got a certification to do this type of training, and it's what I love doing. So I would love to have you introduce yourself, since we have a couple of new faces on today, and just tell me who you're with.
I'm Glenna Phillips, and I'm with Central Kansas Mental Health here in Salina, Kansas.
Perfect. Thank you. Elizabeth?
I am Elizabeth Weiss, and I am with the Community Foundation of Dickinson County in Abilene, Kansas.
Perfect. Thank you. Jackie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jackie Augustine. I'm the executive director for Audubon of Kansas, currently living in Salina.
Perfect. And Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Leite. I'm the training coordinator for all these wonderful trainings that North Central Regional Planning Commission has been purchasing with grant funds from all these talented trainers across the state. And we have these available and many more, and we're working on some more for the next year. The grant ends in July. So all these free to you trainings will go away then. And I live way up in North Central Kansas, so glad to have remote work.
Yes, yes. Well, Zoom has made things possible that weren't previously possible, hasn't it? All right, so I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint presentation and I'm going to share my screen.
Will these be slides we'll be able to get a copy of once we've completed today?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
I will
you.
send out the slides so you have those.
Thank you.
So we are going to go through this. This presentation is effectively govern and strategically plan. And we'll go over a few things, Jackie, that you have probably heard in some of the other sessions. We do that just so people get an understanding of they didn't attend previous sessions, so they didn't get that information. So it's there's a few things that will be redundant for you, Jackie, but one of the things is I've done strategic planning with nonprofit organizations, and I've been working with nonprofits for many, many years, that I have found is when you go to strategic planning, if you don't have a good board structure in place, it tends to not be as effective as if you have that board structure in place. So we're going to start out today just talking, if I can get my PowerPoint to move. Oh no, I just went way past where I was supposed to go. Here we go. So we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to start first talking a little bit about what the board's role is in an organization. There tends to be some confusion in it, and that makes nonprofit organizations, which the two biggest struggles that they face are boards and funding. So it tends to make boards a little bit more challenging if board members aren't really clear about what the board's role is. And there's also some confusion amongst the executive directors that I've met with over the years, and they're not always quite sure maybe what a board's role is as well. So here's a few things that the board is responsible for doing. Their primary role is to support the chief executive. Man, I'm struggling to talk today, and I don't know why. And provide clear expectations. So always communicating to the chief executive what exactly they're supposed to be doing, what kind of goals they want that person to achieve, what do they want to be moving forward towards doing in the organization. And then the board also needs to have clear expectations for the board. So they need to understand what their roles are, what is expected of them, what are they supposed to participate in. And it's more than just showing up to a board meeting once a month and or just showing up to a committee meeting. We need boards to do so much more than that. So as I said, the structure, a board's role is to structure board meetings to direct board's attention to matters of policy and strategy. And often nonprofit organizations, they don't ever get to that point in their board meetings. They're spending their board meetings talking about reporting out what the programming committee did and what the development committee did. And they're often talking about what happened in the past as opposed to what they want to happen in the future. So the board really should be thinking about structuring that board meeting to direct the, attention to those things that are really important. The board's role is also to participate in creating and implementing the strategic plan. So I have heard of boards who think that is their role solely, and they have gone on and done strategic planning and haven't involved the chief executive. That is not their role. Their role is to participate in that strategic planning process with the executive director and other staff as needed. And then their role is to provide feedback on the performance of the chief executive and the board of directors. So it's important for them to think about evaluating that executive director, hopefully on a yearly basis, but also evaluating how effective are they as a board. And that means, again, doing things beyond just coming to a board meeting once a month and sitting around and listening to reports. The board needs to do so much more than that. And that's why it's important to have a good structure before you do go into strategic planning. So management role, that's the staff, the executive director, is really to oversee the day-to-day operations. The board needs to not get into day-to-day operations of the organization unless, and I'll always put it unless, you have one person running an organization and they literally just can't do everything. And so you have kind of a working board and you need some of the board to step in and, send out some letters, help with writing a grant, whatever it is that they do. But eventually over time, as you develop staff, definitely the board's role is not to be in the day-to-day operations. That's management's role. And then the administrative details, anything that has to do with administrative details, again, that's not the board's role unless you have that shortage of staff, and they need to step in and help. It's also management's role to create and implement the programs and services that the organization has. I know that sometimes as organizations transfer, they add staff, the board has to let go of some of that creating and implement programs and services. It can be difficult for them, but ultimately, as the organization grows, it's not the board's role to be having their fingers in what you're doing. That really goes back to that day-to-day work. And then to monitor the goals and progress of the organization. That's really management's role to do that, and then report back and make sure that the board has good information that they can make decisions for the organization, or they can provide advice. Executive's role, more specifically, is to articulate an institutional strategy for review by the board. Now, that could mean taking the strategies that have been created by the strategic plan and helping to bring those out throughout the organization, implement those throughout the organization, although the board's role is to help do some of that work as well. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Structure the board materials and meetings to direct board's attention to issues of policy and strategy. So the executive shares in that role. And I have a cool exercise if we were in person that we would do that really compares some of those roles. And also equip the board members with the capacity to monitor organizational performance and progress. So while we want the board to do an assessment of the board, many board members have no idea what that looks like. So if the chief executive can come up with some tools and templates, resources for the board to use, not only for, the organization performance, but their own performance and other things, you need to be able to equip organizations. Like I said, I work with a lot of nonprofit startups. So when they start up, their staff people, I'm so sorry, I thought I turned my phone off. You generally add other people, and over time, you transfer that work to the board. To the staff. And the difference really, all boards, as I have said in previous sessions that I know some of you weren't in, all boards are governing boards. That's what they're there to do is to govern the organization, to help the organization make direct decisions, to kind of guide and direct. And because nobody owns a nonprofit organization, everything ultimately, falls on them legally and financially. But they have to work, generally they have to work for a while, and that working board is that board that does the work. Is that clear as mud, or did I just lose you all in my babbling? Jackie says it's clear as mud. So then there's also, you have this issue with lack of trust sometimes when you don't have that really good structure, things aren't running right. And that lack of trust goes, an executive director maybe doesn't really trust that the board, they might say they're going to do things and then they don't do things. And then the executive director maybe is left hanging as a sole employee or even as a small organization. Or you have those board members that, and I had this come up in a consulting recently, that don't trust that the executive director is doing what they want the executive director to be doing, and or they wonder, what is the executive director doing with all of his or her time during the day? Because they have no concept of what we as executive directors do on a day-to-day basis. They're not there to see. So sometimes that lack of trust comes in between the board and the organization, the staff. Board members sometimes overstep their boundaries. Maybe they try to take on or keep a little bit of control of the organization. I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with a board member that overstepped their boundaries and got into things that they really shouldn't be into, and or those who micromanage the organization, which I know myself as an executive director can be very frustrating, because I want to go out and I want to make the best decisions for the organization. And I don't want somebody standing over me all the time saying, did you do this? And did you do that? So I just have to show them that I'm going to do the things that, I need to do, and that they're going to believe that I'm going to do that, because I don't want to fall into that, having them micromanage me. And then sometimes you fall into this executive versus board struggle. The executive director is trying to get things done, and the board is, they're trying to get things done, and maybe they have different ideas of how those things should be done. And there tends to build up some frustration, sometimes even anger between the two. And so you have these issues that I think it's important to look at how you deal with these issues, and it help to build a stronger board, a stronger organization. So when you go into doing strategic planning and you go to implement that strategic planning, that you have these things firm and in place. I have struggled over the years with a few organizations that I wanted to do strategic plannings with, and everything was, they had all these issues that stood in their way, that I wasn't really sure. And in most cases, I was right, that the organization was really going to be effective with strategic planning. And when I go out and do that work, I like to be effective at the work I do, as I'm sure everybody else likes to be effective as well. So part of curing those problems, those solutions to those problems, is creating that balanced partnership between the management and the governance that, comes from the board. Trying to figure out how you work best together, trying to have clear, open conversations about where everybody's at. Maybe having the executive director meet on a regular basis with the board chair to talk through any issues that the organization might have, and kind of work through all that. And then letting the staff implement the decisions of the board. So when the board makes decisions, they don't have to do everything that they are making decisions about. They don't have to be in there micromanaging all the things that happen after the decisions are made. They can have the confidence, and they should have the confidence in the staff to carry through, make sure that those things happen the way that they're supposed to happen. It's important for the board to hire the right executive as well. Is Jackie saying, yes, we've got to hire the right executive? Yeah. Boards aren't always great at hiring the best person for an executive director. And when they're going through change, they really need to evaluate what are the needs of the organization. And I have a couple of really good hiring stories. And I don't know if any of you, Glenna, are you a social worker?
Yes.
Okay. So are you an executive director too?
No, I'm a project director of our new CCBHC, which is a behavioral health clinic.
Okay, perfect. So, because I don't want to offend you in any way, because it's not meant to be offensive, but I have seen organizations that do social services that the board decides they need to hire an executive director that's a social worker. Now, I have nothing against social workers serving as executive directors, but what I've traditionally seen is that social workers love to implement programs, and they don't necessarily want to oversee the budget and go out and do the fundraising and other things that can be ho-hum, I guess, about being executive director. They're become social workers because they want to go out there and make a difference. And that not to say that I haven't seen some excellent social workers that end up being excellent executive directors, but I have also seen some that have been executive directors for several years, and they're just like, I don't really like doing this. So sometimes a social worker doesn't necessarily bring the right skills to the table as an executive director to run the organization. And sometimes they do. But more often than not, I've seen that's not really what's in their wheelhouse, because they're passionate about going out and working with the people. Glenna, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I've been here for 25 years.
Yes.
All my executive directors have been social workers, and we're
Yep.
very available, and they kind of have all of those pieces.
Good.
And
Well,
so it's nice to see that, yes, so I totally understand what people feel about social work, and that it's to go out and do
yep.
wonderful things in the community. But we actually, some of our leadership team we are very instructed and taught about regarding budgeting,
Yep.
fundraising. So we kind of open the door in our leadership in our company for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I worked with a lady at out in Butler County that was a social worker at a school for many years, and she took on the Child Advocacy Center out in Butler County, and she was an excellent executive director. But initially, she was just like, this is kind of all overwhelming, because that wasn't what was in her wheelhouse. But
Yeah, you have to learn a lot of different things.
You do. So
And
that's like I
surround
said,
yourself with people that know those things.
yes. So like I said, there's exceptions to that, but more often than not, that's what I've kind of seen. So not always is the social worker the correct person. Not always is the business person that came out of business and goes in to become an executive director the right person. So it's just important that they find what skills does that person need in order to make sure that the organization is operating well. And then choosing the right board members. And of course, that's the board's role to choose the board members, but having the right people around the table, people that are engaged, people that want to do the work, people that really care about the organization and making a difference, and people that have a variety of skills, expertise, and strengths. So you can't put all, I'm sorry, Glenna, I'm not picking on you. You can't put all social workers around the table. Maybe you need somebody that has life experience. Maybe you need somebody that has finance experience. Maybe you need somebody that has marketing experience. Maybe you need somebody that has grant writing experience. So you can't put all the same people around the table in order to have diversity on the board. So choosing those right board members, and then making sure that everybody's clear about communicating whose role is what, can certainly help lead to some of the solutions to those problems. And then, of course, putting in place, creating the right policies and procedures, creating those and putting those in place so everybody understands what are the policies and procedures for an organization. So that's some of the solutions. Also, make sure that the board is big enough to incorporate diversity perspectives, make sure that they can actively participate. It's hard to do a lot of things if you have a too small of a board. It's also a lot hard to do and be effective if you've got too big of a board. I know a board here locally in Wichita that has 40 board members, which is, I think, a lot, a whole lot to try to wrap yourself around. I think it's important to develop a strategy for getting those right board members in place. I also think it's important that board members have term limits and they regularly add new board members. So you don't have the same board members on the board for 15 years. And I'm working with the board right now that I think I may have told the story last time that I'm 59, and another guy who's 58 recently joined the board, and we're the youngins. Everybody else has been on the board for like 20 years, and they're all in their 80s. And the organization is struggling to survive. So we're working to develop that strategy for getting new board members on and adding new blood and adding younger blood and making sure that those term limits keep people moving off the board that need to move off the board so new things can happen, so change can happen. So then making sure that you also address issues with board members as they arrive is really important to creating that effective board. It's not best to let things fester. So the other thing, and I like to talk about creating effective committees, and I only got one slide, I think, on that. But the reason I like to talk about that is you'll find later when I talk to you about this process of strategic planning that much of the work falls on the committees. And if you don't have a good committee structure, strategic planning, implementing that strategic plan is that much more difficult because somebody besides just the staff has to be able to do the work, especially if you're working with a small organization. So you need to make sure that if you are creating committees, that they align with the organization's strategies. Don't create committees. And I did tell the story, I think a few weeks ago. I present to so many different groups. I can't remember who I tell stories to. And Jackie's probably the only one, and Laura, that have heard my stories. So I'm working with an organization that has about 12 committees, and I've got them to combine them. We've made them into 4. But they have all these random committees that really don't align with what the organization is doing and or can be combined. So it's important to just make sure that you're not creating a bunch of random committees for no purpose. And balance those committees with the use of ad hoc or time limited task force. So if you're going to do a special project that doesn't need a committee, you can use task force that are just happen for a limited amount of time till you get that project done. It doesn't need to be something that's ongoing. And then you can create organizational work groups that report to the staff, not the board. So here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, we're in a part of our growth cycle where we've added enough staff that we've traditionally had a programming committee and a membership committee. We have staff that oversees that now. So we're in the process of not having a chair from our board that participates in the committee because the staff is capable now of doing that work. At one point in time, we weren't able to do just that work. We had to have those board members around the table to do that. So it's important to think about how you can get the work done with bringing people together in the right way. And then don't forget to recruit outsiders to serve on the board committees as appropriate. When I say outsiders, that's people who don't serve on the board. You can certainly engage them to grow your committees, and then that gives you an excellent pipeline for future board members. Okay, Jackie, did I get all that right?
I think you're doing very well
Okay.
at repeating your stuff.
At repeating myself, I'm going to get out of that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about governance. So I love this quote. There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And that ties back again to why create all these committees and all these different groups to do work that still shouldn't, is not work that really needs to be done at all. A board can be very efficient in doing things right, but still not be effective. It is not doing the right thing. So the governance overall is defined as the board making decisions on behalf of members or stakeholders. And you note that the definition does not include management decisions. So it's not their role to make management decisions. And of course, the board is guided by bylaws, articles, and policies, which all of you already knew. So for those of you who don't have a governance committee, the governance committee, some organizations, and Glenna, since I've not had you on before, I'm not sure whether you have a governance committee. Do you?
We have a board of directors and our executive director, and then we have the chair, and then they do some of the pieces in there.
Okay. So some organizations develop a nominating committee. I make a recommendation that they develop a governance committee, and this also will tie into your strategic planning. And what the governance committee does is they lead the board recruitment efforts, the orientation and the education board development type of efforts for the organization. They help kind of redescribe, create new, update board roles and responsibilities, board member agreements, those kind of things. They participate in assessing, doing a board assessment and assessing how effective the board is. And then they also work on succession planning for the board and sometimes for the executive director. So they're not just about nominating, they're not just about reviewing the bylaws every year, but they're really kind of looking at some of the underneath structure of the organization. So that's why a governance committee, I recommend every organization try to have a governance committee because it's about so much more than reviewing the bylaws and getting new board members on board.
And we do have something similar to that.
Okay. And then I know, go
I'm
ahead.
not an executive director, so I don't know all of the things
Yeah,
that
sure.
the
Yeah.
board meetings, but that's why I'm on, just to kind of learn about stuff like
Yeah,
that.
of course. Yeah, we love to have you. So here's an example of what a governance calendar might look like and all of the work that they might do throughout the year. And this is why, as I talk to nonprofit organizations, they say, well, we don't really need a governance committee. All we do really is update the bylaws and do board recruitment. That's all we do. But see all these other things here that they really can develop an annual calendar of all the different things they do. And Glenna, I'll send this out. I know Jackie already has it, but I'll send this out to you because you can kind of see what an example looks like. This is based on a fiscal year beginning in January. It would, of course, shift if your fiscal year begins in July, whatever that fiscal year looks like. But you see this thing right here where it talks about strategic planning retreat. So if you've got a governance committee, they can kind of take control and make sure that that strategic planning retreat happens. And you notice I have down here, strategic planning retreat occurring in October if the fiscal year starts in January. I know organizations that say, okay, our fiscal year runs from January to December. Let's do strategic planning in February and let's plan. So let's say we'll do strategic planning in February 2022 for the 2022 year. By the time they get through this process, it's generally like April. And they're like, okay, well, we really got to get busy. We got to make the strategic plan happen before the end of the year so we can meet our goals and stuff. And it seems to kind of dredge on. And, before long, it's like July and they're like, and so what I've done is ask organizations to consider doing strategic planning in October and having that strategic plan all ready to launch in January of the new year. And the other thing that I find very interesting is some organizations want to start their strategic planning so they've brought on new board members that are going to start in January. They want to make sure that they include those new board members in strategic planning so they can bring a different perception to the table. But when I've done strategic planning with organizations that have just brought on brand new board members, they're like, I don't know what our strengths and weaknesses are. I don't know what to contribute. I don't really know. I don't know what to say about this. I'm just brand new. So in retrospect, it'd been better to have those board members that maybe have been serving for 3 years and are getting ready to roll off the board share what they've seen over the past 3 years than having brand new board members that don't have any idea what to share to participate in that strategic planning. Does that make sense? Yes. So I've asked organizations, think about shifting that back some. Be prepared for the new year and to really get out there and make that strategic plan happen. So why should you do strategic planning? Well, it's a plan for one. It's a plan for what to do for the future, but it certainly brings clarity and agreement on the mission and the vision. So it gives you a chance to kind of review those things and look at, are you doing what aligns with those things? It helps you prepare for the future, what you're going to do in the next year, and think about what kind of changes are coming up outside of pandemics, because I don't think that any of us could have ever been prepared for that. So what kind of changes are coming up? And it helps you kind of manage that change and get prepared. Think about how you're going to get through that change. Think about what else needs to happen. And of course, it certainly helps you determine priorities and improve decision-making, creating some strategies, how to move forward, what you should be focusing on, all those types of things. And it really kind of helps to align the board and staff to recommit to the cause of the organization. And I think that's important. Sometimes organizations tend to fall in the trap of they've created strategic plans in the past. They ended up on a shelf. They didn't really do anything with them. So they just fall into the trap of just operating. That's just doing doing what they do with no ideas, no strategies for what it is they really need to be changing, or they really need to be refocusing on, or how they need to be growing the organization. So, as I mentioned earlier, the strategic planning should be a joint effort between the executive director and the board. It doesn't fall on one or the other. So the executive director shouldn't take their staff and go create a strategic plan on their own without involving the board, nor should the board do that. And again, I've heard of organizations doing that. So it needs to be a joint effort, and both need to have input and or participation in developing the strategic plan. You need to, as an organization, identify how the process is going to be facilitated. So who's going to do that? And I can assure you it's not best practice to have the executive director lead it, or to have a board member lead it, or have some other staff within the organization. It's better to find a third-party facilitator that has experience doing some strategic planning. But you need to think about how will that be facilitated, and then identify who should be included in the process. So we know that the executive director and the board member should be included, but depending on who you're serving, you might want to invite somebody that is somebody that you serve, your organization serves. So with Glenna, maybe there's a patient that would like to provide input about the services that the organization provides from their perspective. I know I serve on the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Coalition here, and we have a couple of people with lived experience that have mental health issues that participate and tell us, as a patient going through the systems that we have here, what's their experience like and where are our gaps? Something that some of the rest of us, we don't see that. That's not our experience. So you might involve somebody like that, or somebody that's participated in a program. You might invite somebody else that you interact with on a regular basis, or somebody that your organization interacts with. You could invite a couple of committee members that don't serve on your board, but have some different perspective. And then you can also think about what staff should be involved. And the thing about involving some additional staff is, if I was to do strategic planning and I was to involve my membership coordinator here for the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, because she works with membership and benefits and stuff, she would bring a different perspective than even what I have, because that's not the work that I do on a daily basis. So think about who are the staff that maybe should be involved in this process as well. So you also need to think about what do you want to get out of the plan? Do you want to be able to send
I'm thinking about those that are involved in the process. I've also heard the argument of involving those that have no affiliation with the organization, and like other nonprofits. Like, what's your perception of this nonprofit? And so
you're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we did our last strategic planning here for the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, so we invited somebody from our local United Way of the Plains, and they came in and participated in we do very different work, but they gave us their perception of what they're hearing or whatever about our organization. So yes, that absolutely can happen as well. How long of a span shall the plan cover? So do you want to do a strategic plan? People used to do strategic plan, like, we're going to plan for the next 10 years. They really, I know, right, Glenn, a lot changes over 10 years. So these days I see more organizations that want to plan for the next 3 years. I think or maybe 2 years. I think we are living in a society where things change so much. It's hard to plan past 2 or 3 years, right? On the other hand, I also like organizations to think about what are a couple of goals, like where do we want to be in 5 years? How do we want our organization to have changed in 5 years? So here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, we have this building we call the 501c Foundry. We have office space for nonprofit organizations and co-working space and meeting space and stuff. In 5 years, I hope to have a much bigger building that we own, that we've done a capital campaign for, that can house 25 nonprofit organizations. That's a long-term goal. So I'll look at in our strategic planning, what are the steps that we need to take? Because we had to look at what steps we needed to take to get the 6,000 square foot building. I'm looking at, maybe a 20,000 square foot building. So what are the steps that we're going to need to take to do that? So don't forget about some of those long-term goals as well. Because so often in a strategic plan, you might look at those shorter term goals, like we want to increase, our revenue by $200,000 over the next 2 years. That is kind of, sure, that'll bring more revenue in, but why are you bringing more revenue in? Is there something bigger that you want to, you want to be able to serve 100 more people by the end of the next 5 years or something? So think about that as well. And then you also need to think about how much time you need for planning. And this is where I find organizations, especially organizations I do strategic planning with, they're like, okay, we want to do strategic planning. We have 4 hours. Well, strategic planning, really good strategic planning from beginning to end is pretty impossible to do in 4 hours. And I conduct a SWOT analysis via an anonymous survey with the organizations that I work with, so anybody can be totally frank and open about what they have to say, and nobody knows who said, the executive director stinks. Nobody knows that. Somebody may have thought that, and they can put that in the survey, but nobody knows who said it. And so I do that. So when I come in to do strategic planning, we've already done the SWOT analysis, but still 4 hours. When we go to identifying priorities and stuff, that takes a lot of processing. And then when we sit down and create strategies and tasks and stuff. So I don't think an organization can really do effective strategic planning in less than 8 hours. So that's my 2 cents. Yeah, you can try to rush through it. You can try to break it down into a couple of 4-hour sessions, but just trying to do the whole process and come up with a finished product in 4 hours, I don't see it happening.
We usually do a full day retreat, and that's still difficult. So
it
I'd
is.
say the last one we did, it took 6 months.
Yep. Well, that's maybe that's quite a long process, but yeah, I just don't try to do it in 4 hours. So it also helps you prepare for the planning for the organization. It gives you an opportunity to look at where are you at in the life cycle of the organization. You need to look at that as you prepare. So, preparing for strategic planning, if you're an organization that's been around for 50 years and you don't have an executive director after 50 years, you have some other paid staff, maybe 2 or 3 other years, what should be happening different with that organization that you should probably talk about in regards to your strategic planning? 50 years is a long time to go and not have an executive director of an organization. So I don't know what would happen during that life cycle that kept that organization from adding the people that they needed to add and stuff like that. Where an organization is in the beginning of their life cycle compared to, 20 years down the road will be a lot different. So I think it's important to look at where is your organization in its life cycle. It's also important to review an existing strategic plan, if you have one, or the last strategic plan that you had, if you want to bring it up. If it's been 10 years down the road, I don't know if that's as applicable if you've got one that's 3 years old, or if you've got one you've been working off of. You need to think about when you're going to do this planning. When's the best time to do it? When can you get the most people at the table? Is it doing it in the evenings? Board members, I don't know about you, but my board members are all really busy. And that's where that that more than 4 hours, like, how am I going to find more than 4 hours to commit to doing, strategic planning for the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber? So you got to think about that, that not only how much time it's going to take, but when the best time is to do it. And is there funding available to pay for somebody that's a facilitator? Do you need to look around and find somebody that was willing to do that for free? Can you afford somebody from an organization that's going to charge $5,000 as opposed to somebody that might charge you $500? Because there's a wide range of types of strategic planning and people that will charge you different amounts for that. So you've got to look at what funding do you have available specifically and find somebody that fits within that funding. And then what's the commitment from the board and staff, making sure that you're gaining that commitment, making sure they're all on board with doing that and they're willing to participate, and then finding that facilitator. So that's some of your preparation steps. Any questions about that? All right. So part of the advantages of strategic planning are, it really gives you an opportunity, whether you're board members or whether you're staff, to really ask some good questions about what's going on with the organization, what kind of activities is the organization involved in, what's the cost, whether it's dollar cost or resource cost of doing a certain thing, compared to what are the benefits of doing that. And I know that, here we look at our programs all the time and whether they're effective, whether it makes sense to be charging more, be charging less, get more people engaged or whatever. We look at all those costs and benefits of making any changes that we look at. Asking questions about whether or not we should discontinue doing something that you do. Does it still fit into your mission? Is it effective? Is our clients getting something out of it? Because sometimes we can't just continue to do things because we've always done those things. So certainly this is a good time to ask questions about that. And then should we begin something new, a new service, a new event? Should we change something up? This is a good time to evaluate everything that you're doing and make decisions about how to do those things better. So when you start doing your strategic planning, it's really best to start off with kind of reviewing your mission and vision and kind of identifying, are they still really applicable to what your organization is doing? I know that I'm working with an organization right now that the founder began the organization. His focus was on getting guide dogs out to people who are visually impaired. But really what he's ended up doing is really being an advocate for people who are visually impaired. And over the years he's been operating, has actually got very few guide dogs into the hands of people who are visually impaired. But man, he is a great advocate for people who are visually impaired. And so we're looking at revamping his mission statement to really say and reflect what he actually does on a day-to-day basis. But your mission statement should be, the reason an organization exists and the community need it, whatever community need that mission is meeting. And then your vision, reviewing that, how will, if you do that work well, if you do your mission well, what overall big changes would occur in your community? What would the future look like for the community? So just reviewing those, revamping those if you need to, making sure that what you're doing as you grow as an organization is still aligning with these things. The next thing that's important to do is conduct your SWOT analysis. And so that's looking at the strengths of the organization. So what are you doing really, really well within your organization? And then what are the weaknesses of your organizations, of your organization? And these strengths and weaknesses are generally things internally, and then looking at what are the opportunities. So what's going on out, these are generally external. what are the opportunities to do something different out there in the world? What are the gaps that exist in your community that aren't being filled, that you could fill as potentially fill as an organization, or could fill if you do things in a different way? If you added something, what are the opportunities that exist out there in the community? And then what are the threats? And that includes who are you competing with? What other organizations are you competing with? What other challenges are you competing with? Certainly having a pandemic out there is a threat to all of our organizations. So how do we, what are we going to do about that threat? How are we going to do things in a different way? So looking at those things very, very thoroughly. Some people do this in person with their facilitator. Again, I told you I do it anonymously through a survey prior, because number one, it saves time. Number two, I think they tend to be more open about saying whatever they want to say in a survey if they know that nobody's going to know that they said that. And I bring up the executive director because I did do a strategic planning for an organization where they did the SWOT analysis, and somebody said the executive director is really terrible. And I had to bring that out into the room, but I didn't know who said it. But we needed to have a discussion around that if a board member thought that, because that can be harmful for the organization. So however you do it, make sure you do a good SWOT. And then one of the next things is that SWOT analysis, and looking at those things will allow you to look at, and let me go back a slide again. You're looking at your strengths and weaknesses. What are the things that you need to address in those strengths and weaknesses? And certainly, what are the opportunities and what might get in your way? So I like to then take those things that you've identified on the SWOT analysis and kind of go through those and identify, if we had this situation, so let's say we don't have enough funds coming in, and one of our weaknesses is we lack the funding to do a certain program. So then we would have a conversation with the group. Is addressing that issue, is that something that really is a really important high priority for the organization? And if we addressed it, would it have a high impact? Or is it something that, it might be a high priority, but if we brought in an extra, $100,000 a year, it really wouldn't have that much of an impact. And what we're looking for as we do our strategic planning is identifying those things from our SWOT analysis that are going to fall into that high priority, high impact, because this is first where we want to put our focus on the work that we're going to do. We can do a lot of things that, might have a high impact, but they're just not, of all the things that we can do, they don't fall in as a high priority. Trying to think of what a good example I can bring out. Glenna, Jackie, you have a good example of something like that?
Well, I guess when you think of a high priority and high impact, right now we're in the process of really becoming a CCBHC, and that's a high priority.
Yes.
And have a high impact because we're looking at a whole different payment structure for Medicaid.
Sure.
So that's what I would say ours is right now.
Yeah. So if I was looking for, one of the things here for us at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, we look to provide services to nonprofit organizations. So one of the things that we could do, and we will do, we've gotten to the point where we will do that, is that one of the high impacts that we could have is we could provide a grant writer to help nonprofit organizations write grants, and it would have a huge impact on the nonprofits that we serve. But because we've got so much else on our plate, it's kind of been a low priority for us. It's coming up as a higher priority, but it's been a low priority because there are so many things that we as an organization could do to impact the nonprofits that we serve. We can't do them all. So we have to constantly identify what can we do with the staff that we have, or can we add staff in order to be able to facilitate that additional thing. But again, you're going to be focused on really what things are high priority and will have a high impact on your organization as you look at identifying these priorities. The next thing after you look at what falls in high impact, high priorities, then working on setting goals for the organization. And of course, I'm sure that you've all heard of SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So I always ask nonprofit organizations to make sure that the goals that they set they fall underneath the SMART goals. And I generally have them set no more than 3 to 5. If you set more than that, especially if you're working on a 1 year, what were we going to achieve over the next year? People get overwhelmed, boards get overwhelmed, staff gets overwhelmed, because remember, we're taking on some of this work as additional work in addition to all the other work that we're doing. And so 3 to 5 is generally a good number. And then, hey, how are you, Wayne? Sorry, I'm doing a presentation.
Well, that'll be real good.
I know, right? Yeah, I'll catch that.
I'll wait.
Okay.
Or do I just start bringing stuff?
Yeah, just bring stuff in.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah's generally out there. Sorry, I have all these people bringing in Christmas decorations. I'm so sorry. And I just spat out. Anyways, so identifying what you'll do to achieve your goals. When we identify strategies, when I do strategic planning, here's where the board structure comes into place and the committee structure. So I like to break down an organization by their committees, because they generally have, maybe they have a development committee, maybe they have a governance committee, maybe they have a finance committee, maybe they have a program committee. So when I do strategic planning, I like to say, okay, we've identified what's important, and we've identified these goals. And if you're looking at a goal that, and this generally happens when I do strategic planning, some organization says we need to raise, our goal is to raise $250,000 next year. So I'm going to say, okay, when we break out into committee groups, then I'm going to send that committee that around development to come up with strategies for how that committee can work on helping to raise $250,000. So we've identified what they're going to do. They identify what they're going to do to achieve that goal. They're identifying what strategies can they actually use to achieve that goal, and how they diversify those funding streams that are going to come in to address that need. And then I give them a break, and they come back, and all the committees share out as a group with the bigger group about what strategies they have, so other people can make recommendations. What about this strategy? And when they've narrowed down the strategy, then I break them back out and have those committees develop some task and a timeline for completing those tasks. Because the board then has some ownership, and hopefully they've come up with, these committees have come up with these strategies for achieving this goal that they are taking ownership of. And so they can help to implement those strategies. So that's my way of getting them to take that ownership and be engaged in what they're creating. So it's not just a matter of going through the strategic planning process, identifying these goals, identifying the strategies and the task and the timeline, and saying, okay, staff, go do all this additional work. Again, I work with a lot of smaller organizations, and they don't have the capacity to do that. So that's just insight. And here is this actual, this is the form that I kind of give them. So we identify if their goal was to increase net income by X% by January 1st, 2020. And this was assigned, I put here, this is assigned to the development committee. And then I let them work on the strategy. So this one was define budget and make recommendations to the board finance committee. That's just one of the strategies that they use to achieve this increase in net income. And then they identified the task. So they first need to identify what are the operating and program expenses. And this is actually somebody's document. So this is where this is where they got in this. And I don't know who FC is, but that they're going to be responsible for identifying the operating and program expenses. So they know, and they needed to complete this by 2019. And then another strategy that they had was define and increase major donors and consistent go-tos. So they needed to define giving levels. They wanted to define who their prospects were going to be, and they wanted to define who they were going to actually make asks to. And I don't have the rest of what they figured out here, but this then becomes an actual working document that they can work off of as committees and the board as a whole. Any questions about that? I break this stuff down, so hopefully it gets done. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about implementing a plan, and somebody shared this cartoon in a presentation that I saw a while back, and I thought it was so appropriate. So this week on the Nonprofit Channel, Nonprofit Antiques Roadshow, so I was cleaning out an old bookshelf in our office, and I found the complete set of strategic plans dating all the way back to the 70s. And these are in mint condition. It's obvious that they've never been read or implemented. Yes, I can't tell you how many times I've heard an organization, oh yeah, we have one. We haven't looked at it in years, but we have it. And then it says, because unimplemented plans are commonplace, your set is worth nothing, though it is a good source of recycled paper. So sometimes we fall into that trap of not really implementing, and implementing is probably equally as important to doing all the work, because if you don't implement, you've not accomplished anything. So I like to have organizations review and update the plan, their worksheets. So you maybe have the development committee worksheets. They can update those and use those as a focus for their committee meetings. And then they can provide updates to the whole board at the board meeting. So maybe instead of just providing updates about the grant they applied for or whatever, which can all go in a written report, you'll have discussion around, here's what we accomplished towards the strategic plan in the past month. And then you can relate your board meeting agenda items to the goals of the organization, the strategic plan. So every month, having an item on your board meeting where you're reviewing and updating what's happened with the strategic plan, and you're talking about what should be done next, is more important work than reporting out just things that you did in the past, which can be just read. And that ties into having effective board meetings. So it's important in your board meetings that you address important issues and allow time for discussion. I don't know about you, but sometimes at board meetings, we just tend to spend, again, a lot of time reporting out, and we don't really get into a lot of discussion about really important issues that are facing the organization. And you can prioritize agenda items based on what's most important for the board to talk about at that board meeting, what really needs to be discussed to help the organization move forward. I'm going to come back to the mission moment. You can use consent agendas. Have you all ever used consent agendas? I can't hear you, Glenna. Oh, you muted again?
I have no idea what that is. You can't my lips.
I'm going to send you guys a document about consent agenda. So a consent agenda could be, and like here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, you know, we can put our minutes, our financial statements, other reports, we can put those on the consent agenda. So those documents all go out to the board, generally 5 days ahead of time, 4 or 5 days ahead of time. They can review all those questions. And then the board just votes to approve all those reports, the minutes and the financials, all with one motion. So we don't have to spend the rest of our board meeting just going over all those reports. So that's just approved on a consent agenda. Now, just because it's on a consent agenda, if a board member gets that and they say, well, we've got the programming report on the consent agenda, and I have a question, you can pull that item from the consent agenda and vote to accept that report outside of that consent agenda. But again, it limits the amount of time that you spend just discussing a bunch of reports, which a lot of boards like to just discuss a lot of reports. They like to have a reporting out. I had somebody told me, yes, I go to board meetings and all we do is listen to the executive director talk the whole time. And I'm like, well, it's not exactly how a board meeting should go. And then you can use dashboards to track progress of tasks, and certainly even using those forms that I showed you for the strategic planning would be good to keep track of as well. And then another thing is, in regard to effective board meetings, you should all consider adding a mission moment at the end of your board meetings, which is really just a short story about somebody you served, something you've done, some kind of something that reminds the board members that are participating why they're there, why the organization is making a difference. That kind of helps your board meetings be a little bit more meaningful. So I challenge you in regards to those effective board meetings to kind of look at the minutes from your last 3 or 4 meetings and figure out, what are you spending your time discussing at board meetings? Is it stuff that is helping to move your organization forward, or is it not? And then having some discussions about whether or not you are discussing the right things, whether or not you are being strategic, whether or not you are having discussions around your strategic plan, or has it just kind of fallen to the side and nobody's really ever thinking about it? So what can be gained from doing all this work? Your discussions can then center more on strategy and less on just the details of everything that's going on within an organization. Your board meetings will be a little bit more interesting. And I've laughed a few times as I've heard from some young professionals that have served on nonprofit boards that have provided feedback and said, yeah, I'm serving on a board now. I don't really know, it's just a lot of reports. I don't really know how I'm contributing or if I'm making a difference, but I'm serving on a board. And I'm like, especially with young professionals, young people who want to be engaged, that's not what I want to hear. Your board will be better equipped to provide counsel and direction for the organization. And they're there to provide feedback. They want to be able to do that. We open the doors for them to be able to do that. And overall, your organization will be healthier. That's all I have. I guess I ran through that pretty fast because it's only 12:40, but I would love to have any and all questions. I have my email and my phone number down there. You know that I'm willing to provide any sort of resources, anything else that I can provide you with, but I'm going to open to questions or thoughts or input.
Well, I'm finally getting to the point where I feel like I've done SWOT analyses before. I think the part about effective board meetings is helpful that I haven't really heard about or thought about before, but no, I'm feeling, Glenda, the first workshop I took with Cindy, I was like writing every word down, everything was new. And I feel like I'm getting to a point where I'm, at least have some clue about what I'm doing. So
I'm glad to hear that, Jackie.
I'm just really trying to understand all this so I can be a better support to our executive director.
Sure.
because it's pretty, I mean, we've got some pretty heavy lifts with some changes coming up, kind of like if you were to do a strategic plan for 5 years down the road, we would have never, I mean, we never contemplated. We thought 1 year we would get this grant, we get going, and then the next year is when the grant came. So we were not prepared. So now we're just kind of trying to get our training wheels back underneath us with a new change. So,
Sure.
but I want to be able to help our executive director because it is a heavy lift.
Yes, yes, that's fantastic. Every executive director needs good people that are willing to help with those lifts. And I don't know what I would do without the staff that I have. It amazes me that at one point in time, I ran this organization and it was just me. And I look back now and I'm like, I don't know how I did that because they do so much work. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
So on the SWOT analysis, is that something you can find online, or is it something, Cindy, that you have like forms or how to on that?
So I have it on an online survey. Let me look and see if I have it on a form. I may have it on a form.
Okay.
I will look for that. And then I will send you the thing about doing board meetings with a consent agenda. Was there
Okay.
anything else you wanted from me that I can help you with or send to you? I have lots of tools, templates, and resources, tons.
Okay, perfect. I think those are the two that are coming to mind for me right
Okay.
now.
Fantastic. Jackie, anything? Oh, Glenna, did you want me to send you? Because I know I've sent Jackie in the past kind of what a sample annual governance calendar would look like.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about what other things the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber offers besides these wonderful webinars.
We offer tons and tons of things, Jackie. I'll send you, I can send you a brochure, and I can also, we are about to wrap up developing our schedule of stuff for next year. And I know one of the things that we have coming up, but we have a workshop coming up in January. We have one coming up in January in grant writing, and that's the actual writing of a grant. And then we have another one coming on developing a plan for planned giving, which a lot of organizations don't do planned giving. And I think it's because they don't understand enough about planned giving. But, and I think it's hard because planned giving is focused around, getting in people's wills. So when they pass away, they leave you money. But I think it's important way. I mean, if you look at some of the colleges and universities around the country, man, they get some huge gifts sometimes from planned giving. And why more nonprofits don't implement a planned giving program, I think, again, it's because they don't really understand. So this guy that is going to do this presentation he's kind of an expert in planned giving. He's been doing this for many years. And so that's a half-day workshop. You can always find that stuff on our website at ksnonprofitchamber.org. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to add you to our newsletter.
And you have a boot camp coming up, right?
Yes, we have a board chair boot camp coming up. Teaches people all about how to be a good, effective board chair.
And I was wondering if could we invite you to one of our board meetings to kind of give these are the duties of the board. Yeah,
yep, you could.
You do those sort of things too.
I do. Yep, I go out and do that kind of stuff all the time.
Excellent.
Although I'm doing more of it on Zoom than I am going out and doing it, but I do go out and do it too.
Yeah, we've decided to at least move one board meeting to Zoom a year, even post-COVID, just because it's winter and we can
sure, yeah,
include more people because not everybody can travel to our board meetings.
Yep, so. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah,
Quite welcome. And Glenna, it was a pleasure to meet you today. I hope we'll see you on some
Thank
other
you.
trainings that we have
I
coming
think I
up.
have one on finance. I think there was one on financial spreadsheets or something like that, how to read spreadsheets or something like that that I signed up for. So
Yes, very good.
Uh, I come from a long history. We've been here for over 50 years. I've been here 25 of those.
That's a long
Started
time.
at the bottom and worked my way up, and
That's awesome.
is when I first started, I couldn't tell you what a budget looked like, what the purpose of the budget was. It was just, I felt like it was just like a workhorse. And that's not being derogatory. That's just the way it was. And now I'm getting exposed to more budget sheets and how to read those and not feel so behind the eight ball when we're talking about them in leadership. So
Very good. Well, let me know if there's anything that I can do to help you. And like I said, I will send out this information, including the slides for you to have. And hopefully we'll see you at another session sometime soon.
I appreciate it.
Happy
Nice
holidays.
to meet everyone. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Never can figure out how to leave.